particularly about my experience with my startup, Artfundi, and I hope that some of you, it may be different to yours, but I hope that you can draw some insights from it along the way. So with regard to identifying the problem, for me, it was easy. Why? Because it was my problem and I really knew the pain. And I think a lot of startups begin this way. They don't intend, like I didn't intend didn't set out with no idea and just decide to be a startup. I was in a business, I was experiencing a problem and then decided to solve the problem. And that led to a startup. So I'll tell you a little bit about that. I had come from a corporate background. I'd been consulting all over the world to massive corporations in marketing and research. And then I had a family tragedy that I needed to make a life change to just deal with. So I left the corporate world, moved to Cape Town from Johannesburg, and started an art gallery. Completely different industry, completely different kind of business. But something happened. I fell in love with this industry like nothing I'd ever experienced before. So I had this massive passion, but at the same time, I had such a frustration because I was used to coming from a kind of business environment where there were lots of solutions, software, there were lots of tools to help make business and help make everyday work easier. And then I landed in this industry where there were practically none. And so that became a problem for me. And I got more and more frustrated until I decided I have to find a solution. I looked everywhere in the world. There were two softwares at that time available. They were kind of old, they were desk-based, they didn't meet my needs, and they were terribly expensive. So I thought, no, I'll design one. Luckily, I'm kind of a left brain, right brain person, so it wasn't too big a stretch for me. I'll design the solution I need. And I hired a coder, and he wrote the code for me. It took about a year and produced a piece of software, which I then used in my own business for 6 years. Initially in Cape Town and then in London, a gallery that I opened in a partnership. And when I opened the London gallery, I realized the true value of what I'd built, because it really helped us with that now remote team. It really helped us accelerate our profitability from sort of 5 years to 3, which was quite extraordinary. And so identifying the problem was for me fairly easy because I knew it really, really well. I then later on decided that this software that I'd built would potentially solve not just my problem, but a lot of people's problem, and could potentially make a really big difference in an industry that desperately needed digital transformation. And so I took the leap, left the galleries, and took that forward as a startup. And so I came to the next stage of validating the problem. For me, this was still quite easy because I knew where to find lots of others with the same problem. I knew how to talk to them. I had credibility in the industry by then, and I knew really well how to conduct research. So the stage wasn't a problem. The next stage, however, what I found really difficult, writing that problem statement. And you would think, because I know the problem intimately well, that would be easy, but it wasn't so easy, because artists were different to gallerists, were different to collectors, were different to art advisors. So there were these different players and different use cases within my quite niched industry, and they required different wording. And what I found myself doing was sort of falling into this temptation of trying to catch as many customers as possible, and realized that actually focus, even within my niche, focus was going to be quite a big challenge. And in that process, I'll tell you a little bit about some of the kind of pitfalls of not focusing well enough. Because when you start to create marketing messages or even your kind of interview validations questions, you start to fluff out the language a little bit, and everything becomes and starts to feel a bit blunted down. It loses its edge, it loses its exactness, because you're trying to use language that suits everybody. So you take all the outliers out of it, and you end up with something that feels a bit bland and boring to everybody and doesn't quite do exactly what your market needs. So what we ended up doing is sort of, and it took a process of time, get down to a real clear picture of who that person is, almost personifying them and creating a picture of that core target within our bigger group of use cases. Our process of research was step one, to see if a few others, just like me, literally, I was a gallerist, so I went to see if a few other gallerists would buy the product. Now, I was lucky in a sense because I already had, I had a product that had been built as a single tenanted product for me, but it was effectively a pretty good working prototype. And I literally could go out and ask people and show them a demo of that solution that would work for me. So I wrote down all my assumptions about others like me. I listed a whole lot of pain questions because I had just felt the pain. Now I had to articulate it. Then I set up face-to-face meetings with other like me customers, other gallerists. I did about 30 of them. I showed them a demo of a solution after talking to them and asking them about how they would express the same sort of pains that I thought I'd felt. And then I presented pricing, and I signed up 10 customers. I've got most of them still. So it was a great way to validate the product because they had the same similar pains. They did give me some different kind of feedback on certain features, but they had similar pains. They were willing to pay to solve that pain, and they liked the prototype enough to actually buy that thing. So I cloned it out, knowing this was never, that was never going to be the final product. I needed a multi-tenanted, proper tech stack, but I could at least clone that out and sell it to 10 customers. And then I helped them on board and give them one-on-one training. I did it myself, face-to-face at first, I know, and that is not a scalable solution. It was never going to be scalable, but it didn't really matter at the time. And I think it's okay to do things that are not entirely scalable right at the beginning, because you learn so much by doing it yourself. Step two of our process was desk research. So I then Googled everything. I looked at so many galleries. I read blogs and found as many sort of reports that had stats in them about the market, read industry white papers, read related industry reports, and tried to gather as much market size data as I could. So I did quite an extensive amount of that desk research. It's very, very important. And I'm glad I did that as step two and not step one, actually, because it didn't cloud the kind of purity of my reception to just talking directly to those customers at the beginning. Sometimes people do this as step one, but I'm glad I didn't. And then step three, I went back to interviewing again. So except this time I did more. So I prepared a proper interview questionnaire. I trained 3 interviewers, and we partnered with a large event. In this case, it was an art fair. We set up a demo table where we had the product available. We were doing demos at the table, and the 3 interviewers walked around over 3 days of the fair and conducted over 500 interviews. And then we analyzed those results, and we segmented the customers out and the use cases out. And we really got a good sense of how much the pains and the needs overlapped amongst those different types of customers. And we've identified some real key differences, and this helped us later on to focus as well. And it's a challenge to determine which of those use cases or which of those customer types to exclude and which to focus on. It was, again, a real challenge for us to think about excluding any of them, because we already felt like we're in a niche market. We need to try and sort of get all of them, and they're all interested in the same sort of thing, but they behave very differently. And then something happened to us during that exact event. We got offered a great big bright, shiny opportunity. And it was a little bit of a disaster for us. So it was a great big, shiny opportunity in one of the customer types that I would have actually excluded, but the opportunity seemed so bright, seemed so great, so many people. So it was a big corporation, that an insurance company that dealt with a hell of a lot of art collectors, and sort of wanted to get them all onto the system at once. So it was hundreds of people at once, which I knew we couldn't do organically the other way. But we went for it. We went off track, having done this for 7 months while chasing this. It turned out to be a big waste of time and money. And the issue was big numbers, but low willingness to pay. So to Mark's point, it threw our business model, our commercialization model out. So it wasn't that they didn't like what we had, they loved it, they wanted it, but they were not willing to pay enough to make it commercially viable. And so it hurt, and I recommend strongly avoiding this mistake that we did. And make sure you pick the customers who have a real problem and will be willing to pay for you to solve it enough for it to be viable for you. So I have a few tips for you about interviewing. Use normal language. It's quite tempting to use jargon, and be aware that the people, you might be in your industry quite used to jargon that you don't even realize it's jargon anymore. So it's something just to focus on when you're interviewing, because it lowers people's understanding of the question. Only ask one thing per question. If you ask a double-barreled question, it's very difficult for people to give you the right answer, because it might be no to the one half of the question and yes to the other half of the question, and they don't know how to answer it, or they just answer one half and you don't know later on which of the two that answer sort of refers to. So just ask one thing and keep the interview short, 5 to 10 minutes. Otherwise they get bored and they just start throwing answers at you that are meaningless. And then be careful, really careful, not to interpret answers to fit your assumptions. That's also partly why I chose to do, when I did the bigger interviews, chose to just train people because and do the interviews for us, because they were just they didn't have those assumptions in the first place. They were just going to take down the answers and we could interpret them later. And also remember that research is a sales opportunity. So yes, you're gathering data, but at the same time, you're introducing your startup, your product, your solution to people for the very first time. They might actually be customers. They might actually be willing to buy it from you. So put them into a sales funnel, nurture them as leads afterwards. And also don't just do the research once. Things change rapidly. We've all experienced that during COVID. My goodness, the world changed so much. You need to redo the research because the results can really, really change over time. So I'd recommend to redo it annually. And that is, there we go. Other research techniques that we use successfully as well, and very often these are forgotten, and these are techniques that I've used even in my corporate days incredibly successfully. Immersion. I took one of my team, he was my customer support person, and I deployed him as a member of a team on 2 occasions in my customers, in one gallery and in one art fair, because we wanted to figure art fairs out. I literally let him go and work there and help them. In one case for 2 weeks, in another case for a whole month. And he came back with the most valuable insight about how they work that they would never think to tell us about, exactly how they experience the frustrations related to the problems, about the weight of those frustrations, about how they discuss them, about alternative things they're using to fix them. And it was enormously valuable research to us. And the second one is observation. We used to go and literally sit and watch at galleries and at art fairs and in studios, and just spend time on focused observations. So focused being we've thought about what it is that we're going to observe, and we've got some assumptions written down, and we're looking specifically for those sort of things. And it's quite a good idea to do this observation before and after a customer has, or a potential customer has, adopted your solution. And you see more than people think to tell you in interview questions. So they forget about certain things. So you can see the change, you can see how they're doing things differently if you just sit and observe for a bit. That's me for tonight. Thank you very much for your attention.